Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Before we get started today, I just want to remind you that one of the ways we keep the lights on around here is, of course, subscriptions to Blaze TV. So if you want to support the show, everything that we're doing, and get access to all the behind the scenes footage from your favorite Blaze TV personalities, head over to blazetv.com/Auron to get $20 off your subscription today. That's blazetv.com/Auron to get $20 off and support the show today. All right, guys, sports betting. It's become this giant epidemic. It used to be where you watched television or movies, and yeah, someone went to a casino every once in a while. Maybe they had a small poker game in the background. But the sports betting, the constant betting on the horses, calling the bookie in on for points on your basketball game. This was degenerate behavior. This was routinely shown to be behavior that was for people who were backsliding, who were in the grips of addiction. Now it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's on every television show. It's on every podcast. You have celebrities endorsing it. Of course, even the different sports leagues themselves have integrated sports betting into their model. They're showing the odds, they're showing the different bets you could make, they're doing the advertising for all of this stuff, and it's all done from your pocket. This has radically changed the way that we look at gambling, especially as it spreads beyond sports to all kinds of other stuff like political prediction markets and wars and video games. Joining me today to talk about that is one of our favorite returning guests, Mr. Jay Burden. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, Auron, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
So this might be in some ways generational. And it's interesting because I know a lot of people watch this show and maybe they're not the biggest fan of sports, right? I'm somebody who I enjoy watching my one team. I watch the Buccaneers, on Sunday most of the time for national football and the National Football League in the United States. And that's pretty much all I watch when it comes to sports. But a lot of people will sneer at this and say, well, this is just a sports bro problem, right? Like the sports ball American who watches all the football and is obsessed with all the sports league and is doing fantasy football and all these things. That's just a problem for them. But what I think is important, as we're going to get into here, is it's while this starts in sports and it may mainly impact that crowd right now, it's spreading into every aspect of our lives. Again, from wars to politics to video games. You can gamble on literally everything all the time. And all of these different apps and opportunities are presented to people constantly. So people over probably like 40 or 50, they're still doing this to a decent degree because they're sports fans. But the people under 50, they're doing it a lot, not just through sports, but through these other avenues. So is this something that you have seen impact people in your real life?
Oh, yeah, it got extremely popular over COVID. People were locked at home, there wasn't much to do. And okay, there were some disruptions to sports, but let's be honest, a lot of people were watching a lot more. And the Supreme Court, I believe, overturned a nationwide ban in 2018. There was a little bit of lag time there. And I mean, for most people, it was relatively harmless. Like every once in a while, my friends and I would, you know, put $5 in a pot for the most disgusting parlay possible, right? 1 in a million odds, just because it's like, why not? You're basically throwing $5 away. Harmless. But there were a lot of guys I went to college with who kind of went into a hole during COVID, who got seriously addicted to sports betting. Guys who weren't making a lot of money, weren't really doing a lot with their life, who got genuinely addicted to it. And look, humans like to gamble. It happens in any society, and there will always be people who are addicted to gambling. But as you said, there's a world of difference between, some guy who's got a bookie, right, who's really in deep, and dozens of different apps promoted by famous celebrities, promoted by the leagues themselves, which are quite literally two button presses. Many of these apps, as I'm sure your listeners will be aware, incentivize you to get started. It's like the old 80s drug PSA, like, hey kid, you want to try a hit? They'll give you $100, $200 just to start. And obviously, the reason they do that is they know there's a certain number of people who are going to become effectively chemically addicted to gambling. It bears mentioning, the type of sports betting has also changed. It's become much more granular. Whereas before, you might bet on a spread or you might bet on who's going to win the big game. And obviously people have always, unfortunately, lost their lives to gambling. You may be familiar with a famous Russian guy, Dostoevsky, wrote a book about this, The Gambler. But this new technology has enabled these very minute micro bets. So not necessarily betting on the outcome of the game, but in a fight, you'd say, decision in round one under this amount of time, or this many significant strikes, or, XYZ, very granular things, which has made throwing a match, much, much easier. Because now you don't have to convince an entire sports team or convince someone to throw away their entire career. All you have to do is mess with it a little bit. Maybe you don't go for that shot because there's a lot of money on you scoring XYZ number of points. And as we'll get into later, this has already happened. So there's multiple layers to this. There's the moral hazard. What are we doing to people? How does this affect society? But also, how does this affect sports? And the answer is not positively.
Yeah, there's so much to get into there. I guess we'll just start at the beginning. I'm very lucky in that I gambling is just something that has never appealed to me. I have friends who go to casinos regularly, and I've gone with them. And I don't know, just the minute the first $50 evaporates on the table, I'm just like, what are we doing here? Again, this is not a holier than thou thing. There are plenty of vices that I am far more susceptible to, but this one just never tripped my dopamine receptors, right? It just doesn't work. Yeah, for me. And so I'm very glad about that. And luckily my friends who tend to be more gambling inclined, they still tend to be more casino oriented. So they haven't gotten into the sports betting yet, probably because I'm old. But also, one of the biggest parts about this is much like any other vice, it used to be something that you had to travel to do in a shameful kind of manner in a restricted place, right? Like you could do sports betting, but you had to go to Nevada, right? If you wanted to go to the casino, you basically had to go to Vegas, right? Like these things were
Or
much
call
harder to
someone
reach.
with the criminal record,
Right,
right?
right.
Like index with the underworld.
Exactly. If you wanted to make these bets, from the comfortable environment of your home, you had to involve yourself with somebody who was going to break your knees should you not deliver that payment, right? So there was like a hard barrier. It was again a lot like pornography in the sense that yes, it was available, but you had to like travel to some seedy, weird store in the middle of town, and everybody knew it was for, and it just is gross, and most people didn't want to involve themselves with it. So there's like this natural barrier between people and the consumption of that vice. The same thing existed with with gambling. It was either more or less harmless stuff happening at a kitchen table, or it was like very serious. I need to dedicate myself to making this mistake to step into it. Now it's something that's right in front of you. And I'm sure you are familiar with this, but for people who don't know, gambling plays on what's called the Skinner box response in mammals, right? If you want to train a dog, the way to train them is not to have them do a behavior and give them a consistent reward. That's actually a mistake to understanding the proper way to obsess them with a behavior. The thing you want to do is that sometimes they get a reward, and then sometimes they get a random large amount of rewards, and sometimes they get nothing. And that constant need to like figure out if I hit the button, what kind of food comes out of the dispensing machine. This is called a Skinner box, right? And this is what a lot of our social media is now based on. I open up my social media app. What am I going to get? Am I going to get this constant hit of dopamine? Am I going to get nothing? Is there going to be an explosion of attention? Like this plays through all kinds of dynamics now in our social media landscape. A lot of people involved in engineering software are looking directly at this kind of behavioral psychology to figure out how to addict people to these different products. But gambling always has this, right? Like that's why it takes a hold of people so deeply when it has it. What you always have that opportunity to just have this amazing payout and then nothing, and then enough drip to keep you going. And as you say, there's now a common attempt by these different platforms, the FanDuels and that kind of thing, to offer you some free money up front. Again, anyone who's ever been to a casino recognizes this behavior. The first time you sit down to blackjack, the first $100 you lose in slots or blackjack, you can get back. Now, you can't really get it back because it's with the company either way. But in theory, if you lose it all, you could get it back and gamble it again. And this just feeds you into the behavior. And once you've gotten into that cycle, then it's very easy to continually keep you addicted, especially as you say, when the barrier is so low that I can just open up my phone in the same way I would post on Facebook, and suddenly I could drop $5, $100, $1,000, $10,000, and not even blink.
And this is something that I think a lot of conservatives feel conflicted about. That many people understand the moral hazard of gambling. For instance, in my state several years ago, they legalized skill games, which is basically slot machines at pretty much gas stations in rough areas. And what has that done? Well, sure, there's a benefit to the economy, but it's basically immiserated poor people. Like every time you go in, there's some, old lady who looks a little rough, just throwing her money away. And look, is there a possibility she would be throwing it away on something else? 100%. But for conservatives who have a lot of kind of inbuilt libertarian sensibilities on the economy, there's this feeling of, oh, well, that's freedom. That's their choice to do so or not. So who am I to restrict that? And I understand where that comes from, but the problem is things like that, things like gambling, especially on a widespread level, are corrosive to society. They immiserate people. They make their lives worse. And you're allowed to say no to things. You don't have to just allow bad things to happen because of kind of scatteredly applied libertarian economics. You don't just have to accept bad things all the time because it would be mean or rude or inconsistent to not allow them to happen. And look, almost every culture, at least almost every Western culture, has put a significant stigma around gambling. It was recognized to be a generally disreputable thing. And particularly in the American South, we've always had a different attitude towards vice than sort of the New England Puritans. It was never officially sanctioned, but there were places to do that. You could go on a riverboat, again, but there were barriers placed in between that desire and most people. And look, we understand we're not asking for something impossible. It is many societies have decided to restrict gambling. You're never going to get rid of it, but this incredible proliferation and ease of access, and also, shall we say, conflict of interest with many industries like sports, has created this huge problem.
Funny enough, I got into a knockdown dragout with with the head of a Republican state party over this fact. Me and R. Reno, funny enough, were speaking at an event, and he had mentioned something about limitations on government, that kind of thing, and we both pointed out that things like legalizing drugs or having sports betting was ultimately deleterious to the kind of his state. And he got very hot and said, well, this is just freedom. This is the free market. Aren't we Republicans? Don't we believe in liberty? What are you talking about? Big government getting involved in all of this stuff. And of course, Reno, being kind of an arch Catholic, and myself being a arch Protestant Catholic, basically said, no, you like, obviously you have to involve the government. The civil magistrate has a duty to protect the people from vice. Like yes, as you point out here, in most cultures, they understand that there is going to be some level of this, right? Like prostitution is going to exist, drugs are going to exist, gambling are going to exist, right? No one who isn't living in some kind of utopian fantasy believes these things simply don't exist. However, there is a lot of wisdom in heavily restricting the places they can exist. Now, some of these things can be entirely eliminated. Some of them can't. And for the ones that can't, circumscribing them in a particular situation really saves a lot of people's lives, right? Like it really does change something in the mind, especially of the addict, of having something in their pocket ready to pick up the minute they can, as opposed to having to go to an undesirable place and engage in obviously socially disliked behavior. And there's a barrier there. The fact that there just happens to not be that addiction right sitting at your hand does quite a bit. But as you say, there's a conflict with this kind of libertarian form of economics saying, well, there, as long as it's a market transaction, it's fine. And you'll notice that that is a lot of the language going on. So as we pointed out, this is not restricted, of course, to sports now. The fact that this has become widespread after the Supreme Court ruling you were referencing in 2018, the fact that that has become widespread across all kinds of what are now being called prediction markets is quite significant, because this means that places like Kalshi will run different advertisements saying, "Hey, do you think the government shutdown is going to last 3 weeks or 4 weeks? Well, you could make $50,000 if you're right." And so there's just every decision. In fact, the owner of Kalshi just did an interview where he said the goal is to monetize every single point of human disagreement. Like, he just like that laid it out. Like, every single disagreement, every difference of opinion can become a monetizable function inside the system. And I guess somewhere there's like a libertarian just salivating at that idea. But for those of us who recognize that actually there are quite a number of things in the world that are sacred and should not be subject to the market forces, there are actually things that should not exist inside the marketplace. This is horrific. And just turning everything and saying, oh, well, ultimately it's just about the market. This is a terrible cop out. And especially for people, libertarians might be able to get away with this, but for conservatives who are supposed to pretend like they do care something about the moral fabric of the country, allowing this at scale, I mean, obviously the money is just too good for a lot of these people, but ultimately the fact that they can't find the wherewithal to take a moral stand seems to be a huge issue.
Well, additionally, I think it's important to address one of the common arguments you see in any sort of discussion around vice, which is the idea that by legalizing it, you can reduce harm. You can reduce criminality. You can reduce the sort of additional exposure to, for instance, people who are going to break your knees. And that premise, it was convincing to many people for a long time, particularly around legalization of weed. The idea was, well, we'll take this off of the black market. We'll regulate it. We'll make it safer. We'll reduce the amount of criminality involved. Has that happened? Well, if you look into this, you'll find out that there are Chinese triads running giant weed farms in the middle of rural Maine. You'll find out, as we'll mention a couple times, that there are large mafia-connected sports betting rings that are using ostensibly legal services, but still using that to fund criminality. The idea that this is the way to solve these kind of social ills is by destigmatizing and regulating them, or bringing them into kind of normal culture, is clearly not the case. I mean, look, I was in Portland not too long ago, and this is the second time I've been. It was much nicer the second time. Well, why was that? It's because previously they had completely decriminalized open air drug use. So you could just smoke crack in front of a preschool. And so you had a bunch of people everywhere smoking crack. And then, contrary to what you'd expect, when they said you're no longer allowed to do that, there's a lot less of it. You create incentives and people react accordingly. So this premise that you hear over and over and over again, that the way to solve social ills is simply by destigmatizing negative behavior, that society's reaction is the real problem, is clearly not borne out in the data, clearly not borne out in experience. And this is an idea that we're comfortable calling out in, the liberals talking about homelessness or talking about drug use. But many people who are, erstwhile conservatives get very uncomfortable when it comes to something like gambling, which has become a major part of the economy. I mean, even look at certain factions of the Trump coalition, right? Look at someone like Dave Portnoy over at Barstool. He is a wealthy man because of sports betting. That is already creating, one, a huge conflict of interest, but two, well, what does that sort of conservative actually look like? Like, look, I'm not trying to character assassinate Portnoy here, but he's someone who, is.
I don't think you have to. I think he's perfectly good at that himself.
All right, I was trying to be kind, Auron. What do you want me to say? But takes that same attitude of libertinism that he takes towards gambling, and he says, oh, Roe versus Wade went away, so I'm not going to vote for Trump. That's human rights. So remember, you got to understand, fellow conservatives, when you're making friends with social libertines, you've got to understand they don't just apply that sort of social acid to things that you don't care about. They will use that exact same tactic when it comes to abortion, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to things that deeply, deeply matter. So to me, this is one of those issues where I understand why people feel reticent to condemn the free market, to condemn liberty in this way. But if you dig just one or two layers down, you'll understand that this is completely legitimate for conservatives to have an issue with.
Yeah, there's of course this complete lie that's been pushed by libertarians and even conservatives that prohibitions don't work, right? Like you just can't limit anything. The government can't limit things; people will just do them anyway. And that's just observably not true, right? And even on things where I am incredibly sympathetic to basically no regulation, like firearms, it's very clear that the regulation of firearms did significantly reduce the type of firearms one could own, like pre-assault weapons ban, these kind of things, very very restrictive. I remember several situations where there were like large shootings and lots of threats of new gun legislation being passed, and people panicked and bought ammo and AR-15s and AK-47s and all these things because they would just never be able to buy them again. And so you might disagree ultimately with prohibition, but pretending like it doesn't work is kind of ridiculous. Now, there are, of course, all kinds of secondary effects. The points that people make that perhaps alcohol prohibition in the United States, while it had some upsides, alcohol was simply too ubiquitous and too culturally ingrained in order to be effectively pushed out, and therefore created criminal consequences. These are fair points, but this is a great reason why you don't want something like sports betting to break through and become ubiquitous in your society, because once it's in the society, it's far harder to get it out. It's better to keep that hedge up, keep that fence up, than let it in and then try to drive it back out again once you realize it's ultimately a mistake. And this is really the huge part of what has happened again with sports betting, because it has made all the other forms of wagering so much more acceptable to other people. And we've already seen, as you point out, that it's infiltrated into the sports themselves. So we've seen big scandals with the NBA, and you just recently told me there's one with the UFC I wasn't aware of. But we're seeing the scenario, as you pointed out earlier, where these parlay bets are so complicated, right? There's several different aspects. It's not just did you win or did you lose or just the point spread. It's micro things like if there's going to be this specific type of kickoff or this specific type of submission, or there'll be all these different micro things that you can bet on, and many of them don't even actually impact the winning of the game. And so many athletes can effectively trigger these bets knowing that they're very high percentage, and if they leverage them properly they can make huge amounts of money without necessarily having to get all of their teammates together and like Black Sox throw huge games and have these massive cheating scandals. And so we've already seen this in NBA, we've already seen this in UFC. It's certainly happening across the board in every conceivable market. And so you have this situation where not only do these apps exist, not only are they wildly altering the games that they are being used to bet on, but in many cases it's extremely difficult to detect when and how these markets are being manipulated by the players involved. The players know that one thrown shot, one missed thing, one particular way in which you manipulate the score, the outcome, could allow you to continue to win the game. But just making sure that you didn't do it by this many points or in this particular way could ensure a massive win for you in the manipulation of the market of a bunch of suckers who did not know that ultimately you were putting your thumb on the scale.
Well, and this is relevant as well. One of the biggest kind of ongoing stories of the last several years has been more and more people realizing that elected members of our government are able to make themselves massively wealthy with insider information.
Right.
Obviously, you see the same thing with sports betting. For instance, one of the first big UFC betting scandals, and I promise I'll make this easy to understand, is that in 2022, this minor fighter was suspended for like 2 years for concealing an injury. It seems kind of weird, lying about an injury. People do it all the time. Well, it turns out because everyone at his gym knew that he was hurt, that he was hiding it, and they all bet against him. One of the guys on the team had basically found out this strategy. He would call all around, figure out who was hurt going up into a fight. And the guy involved, the guy fighting, he didn't even need to know about it. But if you figure, that guy tore his ACL, he's still got to make the big game, still got to make the fight. But that. All of a sudden, the line that everyone else sees, the information everyone else has, is completely irrelevant. Sure, it doesn't work 100% of the time. We know that there's big upsets. That's what makes sports fun to watch. But all of a sudden, you've created insiders and outsiders with large amounts of money flying around. And additionally, once large amounts of money fly around, you're creating a massive interest in finding out that sort of information. So this brings into corruption with refs, which is, let's be honest, the oldest story in sports, right?
Right.
But there's a difference again between that being a mob activity, that being something that, is thrown underground, very difficult to access. And again, a bunch of, let's be honest, dumb money. People who just have an app on their phone. And so they will, especially if they're not getting the same information that even just a stats nerd could get, let alone someone with, information from the inside. You are basically covering the bad end of a deal. You don't know it yet, but even more so than simple chance, you were throwing your money away. And look, our mutual friend Bog Beef was at one point in his life a professional poker player. And he always talks about this where he's like, I was never a gambling addict, I was a poker player. He liked, he would make money from it, but it was never something he wanted to do. And once the money dried up, he stopped playing. But the way he talks about it, he's like, yeah, the real degenerates, the guys who were really hooked to it, they always go to sports. And that's apparently, at least according to him, and he seems to know what he's talking about, that is both the riskiest because it's not a game of, poker is a game of luck, but there is a skill to it, pattern recognition. You were simply betting on what you hope to be unbiased decisions of someone else. Well, once you have normalized it, you are creating a massive interest to rigging every single micro system in that game. I'll throw it back to you, Auron.
No, this is exactly true. And this brings me to, I think, what is a critical point that is obviously usually avoided very, seriously by conservatives for what will become a very obvious reason. But the fact is that behind this whole discussion is the US stock market, right? Like the fact that it's a waste of time because of the way we have manipulated interest rates to basically invest your money in savings or any of these things. You're just lighting your money on fire. If you're not in the stock market, then you can't even survive the inflation bath that you're taking every single year from our degenerate government and its money printing. So that means that everyone who is not like a sucker is in the stock market, right? Because they have to be. There are very few other options in order to efficiently make sure that you at least escape inflation, and if you're doing well, outpace it. And the fact that in many ways the stock market is just obviously indistinguishable from gambling, right? Like I know a lot of day traders, right? And every single one of them is just sitting there going like, no, really, man, I've got it under control. It's fine. It's fine. I'm a professional. I do professional things. I am absolutely not just like a heroin addict. Like it's so clear, that this is they lie to themselves about, I understand, I've got a system and the whole thing. And it's just like, you really can't go 10 minutes between a gambling addict and a like day stock trader and hear literally any difference between these people, right? Like, and don't get me wrong, there are skills in stock trading, right? Like that does exist in the same way there are skills in betting, right? But ultimately, these are fundamentally very similar behaviors with very similar feedback loops and impulses. And the fact that our own stock system and as you pointed out, our entire, legislature is basically warped around the fact that we have this open air gambling system our entire economy is based on. And these people pull key levers inside the political system to decide whether your company gets a giant contract from a defense firm or something like that. The fact that that is basically at the core of our political system makes it very difficult to then look at our sports system and say there's a whole lot different. In fact, the trading app Robinhood, the bitch became very famous for like kind of the meme stocks and the meme coins and everything else that was being traded on it, is now just going to sports betting, right? Like they're just integrating both. So there's not even a barrier there. Like you can go and you can buy a meme coin and you can buy, GameStop stocks, and then you can bet on whether or not some guy is going to score the third goal in any given hockey game, like all simultaneously on the same platform. And that really just gives up the game that ultimately across all aspects of our society, we have this highly leveraged, like casino mentality when it comes to wealth. And so it's very easy for people to walk in. I think I saw someone in chat saying, I just signed up for Polymarket. I didn't even think of it as gambling because Is it different from stock trading, right? Like ultimately these things feel similar enough to where, yeah, sure, these are things of skill. I could ultimately be respectable winning money this way. If I can buy stocks on my phone, why can't I make a sports bet on my phone? These are all perfectly reasonable, legitimate market transactions.
100%. And look, we understand that there is a utility to financial services, right? The ability to access capital is essential to having an economy that works. But I'm basing this off of the work of a really talented young analyst, Roberto Rios, Peruvian Bull, on Twitter. And he basically talks about the share of the GDP, the economy, that is generated by financial services. And generally, over most empires through time, it's anywhere from like 2 to 5%. And that seems to be relatively healthy. The problem is, once it grows to a certain point, the best money to be made is in kind of shuffling money around. So ours is, I believe, on this like 10 to 14%, depending on who you ask, significantly over the historical norm. And again, Auron, you and I are not socialists here, right? We're not condemning the idea of investments, far from it. But as you've said, there becomes a problem where your money is constantly being devalued. So you are effectively being punished for saving and preparing for the future, unless you go to get something that bears interest. And if you've ever been to business school, you understand what interest is. It's a payment for risk. The higher the interest rate, the riskier it is. And that interest rate is basically there so that you're willing to do it. Right? If you know your alcoholic uncle comes up and says, "Hey, can I borrow 20 bucks?" You're probably not going to get it back. So you might demand harsher terms than if your sainted grandmother says, "Hey, can I borrow a quarter to go down to the vending machine?" Right? It's a different thing. There's a different payment associated with that, undertaking of risk. And look, people have always invested. I mean, you can go back to, even colonial times. Many of these ships were funded by private money. But that was something that very, very rich people did. People who had money to burn. Whereas for most people, admittedly, they didn't have a ton of access to hard currency, but the idea of speculating was completely like outside of their conception. Whereas now, as you've said, basically anyone who has enough money to save it is putting it into the market. It's putting it into risk. I'm glad you mentioned Robinhood, because we saw a sort of interesting thing happen with Robinhood, where Robinhood opened up sort of consumer access to the market radically. It was very easy. You could do it from your phone. And what you saw is you have Robinhood, you have stimulus checks, all of a sudden the market goes insane because you have a ton of people dumping money in. And look, if you are deciding that your measure as a politician, as a president, as a leader is the stock market, this is the best thing ever for you, because the stock market's just massively shot up. Now, has there been any value created? Are any of these companies worth more just because more people want to buy stocks? No, it hasn't. Nothing fundamentally has gotten better. There's just more capital flowing around. Again, I'm not anti-markets. We've got to understand that these things do have negative consequences, because just like betting, when you can shovel in a ton of low information, and I include myself in that, I don't know anything about the economy, people into the market, you were setting up, again, a bunch of marks. People who you can, as we've seen with the GameStop is a great example, just deliberate market manipulation, force other people to pay the bad end of a trade. And look, again, this sort of stuff is at some scale present in every human society. We understand that. But at the point at which it becomes not simply something that you can do, but is a baseline requirement for not becoming poorer over time, this is a problem.
Exactly right. And again, that's why I feel it's so easy for people to step into something like sports betting, because it just feels like another extension of this. It's already something that they're used to doing. They're used to doing it on their phone. It makes perfect sense to them at a certain level. And just to get some stats in here, so we have a kind of a understanding of kind of the enormity of the problem. Sports betting alone, just the betting, don't, not the crypto casinos, nothing else, just sports betting, cleared almost $14 billion last year. That we're talking 22% of Americans have some sports betting app on their phone. 1 in 5 Americans has placed a sports bet this year. When you go to young men, men under the age of, I believe, like 45 or 40, the number of people with a sports app on their phone goes to 50% of the population almost. So you have this scenario where at least half of young men are investing into this addiction. And the thing is, it creates this. I don't know if you've probably, maybe you've heard this. I don't know, the economy of treats, right? Like where people are so, it seems so impossible to start a family or own a home. Those goals are so far out that the small purchases, the small luxury purchases start to replace that. And this is why we see people who otherwise, can't afford to get a working car or get a home or start a family. They start ordering a bunch of Uber Eats, right? Or these kind of things. And people will blame those services. Oh, well, just be responsible and save. And at some level, yes, absolutely should. Like, ultimately, you are responsible for your finance at the end of the day. This is not a cop out. You need to take control and you need to be disciplined. You need to have the emotional continence necessary to build wealth over time. That said, when you have a scenario where all of these next steps in life seem out of reach for the average young man, then the question becomes, well, why not just gamble it all on a chance to jump up in that ladder, right? Like, if I'm only going to make an extra $50 this month, and there's no way that an extra $50 a month is going to add up to a home at some point, then why not just gamble that $50 in the hopes that ultimately it turns into $50,000? It turns into life-changing money. It allows me to move into these things, which again is not an endorsement of or a excuse for engaging in this behavior, but you can see how quickly kind of the hopelessness, especially of young men who don't see paths forward, can quickly turn into, well, it's probably worth trying this because at least if I happen to get this to work out, then I can achieve something that otherwise would just not be accessible to me, even if I was responsible and careful with my behavior.
Well, Aaron, I'll have you know, one, affordability is a Democrat hoax. And two, you're exactly right. That look, like we understand that that sort of behavior is not ultimately rational. That's not the correct thing to do. But it is understandable because again, I'm sure you remember a while back the big, talking point on the economy was young people and cell phones. Like, oh, young people buy $1,000 cell phones every year, and that's why they can't afford a house. I don't know if that's true, but let's just take it at face value. Okay, you buy $1,000 smartphone every year for 25 years. Gets you to 25 grand. Okay, investing even, $1,000 a year for 25 years still doesn't get you to a down payment on a $500,000 house. It doesn't. And so again, should you be spending that $1,000 every year for the next 2.5 decades? No, that's a waste of money. But when any more useful long-term goal is seemingly out of reach, it's sort of, well, why not? It's not going to matter anyway. I see the term financial nihilism going around. Okay, again, nihilism is not good, but you have to understand that just as with incentives to, gamble or prostitution, people do respond to incentives. People are not, in all cases, complete and total rational economic calculators, pulling the spreadsheet out to figure out how to maximize their utils. We're ultimately emotional. And for the same reason that things like gambling works, things like that sort of, economy of treats, the idea of simply like, well, there's no point in saving for the future, it won't matter for me anyway, is a very real problem. Okay, why is it a problem? I've got mine, you might say. Well, historically speaking, when you have a large population of young men with nothing attaching them to a society, right? No way to, pair off, find a wife, no way to literally have something at stake with property. That is an unstable circumstance. That is not good for long-term health of a society. And so look, someone might say, well, you're just biased because you're under 30. And fair enough, I might be biased because I'm under 30. But also, I have history on my side here. Generally speaking, large populations of unhappy young men with nothing to lose do not a stable, happy society make.
Yeah, what's the African proverb? The young man who's not accepted by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. That's really something that you want to think about. Whether you think those young men are justified or not really isn't a question, because once your house is on fire, nobody cares, right? So it's one of those scenarios where maybe they did eat too much avocado toast, maybe they didn't put enough work into whatever horrible corporate existence you want them to live. But ultimately, when they come to burn down the village, it won't matter if they were right or wrong. It will matter that they're burning your village down. And I think this is important also because we're training younger and younger people to involve themselves in this is a big part of this as well. This is not something I thought a lot about early on, but I'm a longtime card gamer. This might come surprise to people, but I'm a bit of a nerd, and so I am someone who was involved in playing several collectible card games in which opening a card pack was a normal part of the process. And one of the big things about that is you can open up a pack and it can have a worthless card in it, or it can have a card that's worth thousands of dollars. It's totally random. And of course, it's legal gambling. I didn't think about it that way at the time, but that's built into the system. It's preying upon that Skinner box mentality of every time I do this, I get a reward, but sometimes the reward is nothing, and sometimes the reward is life changing, and there's everything in between, and it keeps you chasing that dopamine high, that Skinner box attachment. Well, several years ago, video game designers figured out that you could implement a similar system into video games. It's called a loot box. And you've seen even a number of governments now ban loot boxes because they do have this predatory effect on the minds of young children who are playing these games, who will steal their parents' credit cards and drop thousands of dollars on different in-game collectibles that aren't real. It's just ones and zeros on a screen at some point. But they get that same high. And the thing is that secondary markets have been created for buying and selling these things. And believe it or not, they're even become gambling markets, like massive multi-billion-dollar gambling markets based on trading and gambling these items. And the thing that happens is that a lot of this ends up being pushed by personalities, which is something we haven't got into yet that I want to touch on for sure, is the advertising aspect. But a lot of this gets streamed on places like Kick or on Twitch, and you can see people just sit there in front of these different games, and they can constantly gamble with these different video game assets. And technically, it's not gambling because you buy one type of currency that's not real, but then you change it for something. There are all these legal loopholes that you can kind of move through because you're not technically betting on a real thing. It's a imaginary video game item, so it's not real gambling. And like, there's all these loopholes you can create, but this means that a large number of young kids are currently spending their time playing video games and then going on a line with the different items they've accumulated from playing those video games and those loot boxes, and they are literally just streaming themselves gambling on a regular basis. And you can just watch people win the world or lose it all, and it has all of the dynamics and drama you'd expect that would come from that kind of thing. But it just really is this absolutely degenerate way to get like young, teenagers and even middle schoolers and elementary school kids into gambling without any kind of legal barrier. And all of it is being promoted by many of their favorite online personalities.
Well, and it's important to recognize that in much the same way that sports betting has reduced the quality of sports, it's reduced the quality of video games. Not much of a gamer anymore, but I remember the before and after loot box time. And very distinctly, the goal of creating a video game changed from creating a video game that lots of people want to buy. Okay, might not be high art, but you want to appeal to people to make it fun, versus to get people in the door to plug them into a gambling economy and run it forever. I'm not a huge sports gamer, but you see this with games like FIFA, for example. There's the technical game, right, the thing on the box, and then what actually makes money, which is basically an online card game. Similar things have happened in other sports games. It becomes what people refer to as a live service, something like Netflix that you are constantly paying into forever. It's not like I bought a game, here it is on my hard drive, I'm good for as long as I want to play it. Now it is, well, you're paying. Also, you're paying every month. And also, if you really want the full experience, if you want to get your gambling dopamine, well, you got to be buying in constantly. And look, most people don't do that. Not everyone does it. But the money to be made from effectively abusing what they call whales, people with a lot of money to spend who are hyper addicted to this, is so great that effectively it doesn't matter. And to your point again, we understand, much like, giving a kid alcohol or drugs at a young age, these things are doubly habit forming on developing brains. And the idea that this is just something we have to accept as part of being, free market, sort of limited government Republicans is absurd. You don't have to. You can just say no, and it would go away. Sure, will there be that person who finds the convoluted way, onto the dark web to bet on, I don't know, Korean soccer leagues? Yeah, sure. But that's not most people. And again, I can't remember who it was, some German, might have been Bismarck, said governing by the margin makes for poor laws, right? The idea of you can never fix every edge case, but it is entirely possible to solve this problem for most people. It just requires you to say some things are worth more than a marginal increase to GDP. And that's a very uncomfortable thing for some people to say.
Yeah, and I mean, as somebody who I have myself turned down sports betting sponsors, like I simply am not going to engage in that. But we can see how, again, ubiquitous this is across all kinds of domains. Again, in the video game spaces and the streaming spaces. I mean, we don't, we know people who know this, but some older audience members may be shocked to discover that many of these streamers have millions and millions and millions of followers who are involved themselves on a regular basis. They're often much larger than any given cable TV news audience or program. And these are all people who are involved in engaging with this content. In many cases, we see the advertisements. Of course, you can't listen to Joe Rogan podcasts or any of these very popular podcasts without hearing FanDuel and what's the other one? DraftKings. Like, they're just everywhere all the time, right? There's just massive marketing campaigns, celebrities, every sports podcast. Like I said, it's literally integrated into the sports broadcast now. If you're watching NFL football, here they're giving you the betting lines, they're giving you the percentages, they're giving you the smart parlays. How can you take advantage? Because okay, just as a side, guys, if you're dumb enough, I have to remember where we can use the R word, what platforms we can get away with it on now.
Only when referring to Tim Walz, I think. Okay. Is that appropriate?
Those are the rules. But if you are dumb enough to actually invest in a bet that you're seeing on the screen because they told you it was smart at NFL, like all the other millions of people who are watching this simultaneously didn't just get the exact same orders, is insane. And as you pointed out, if any member of Congress was just going out there, or if any CEO was saying, definitely bet on this, definitely buy this stock, definitely involve yourself because here is the inside information as to why you should do this, like 1,000 red flags, alarm bells everywhere. And yet this is just dominating. Like, even people who have explicitly said that addictive behavior, sports gambling, these things are ultimately bad examples for the community, like Joe Rogan, are still taking just massive amounts of money from these sponsors. And so it seems inescapable. It's woven into every aspect of society, even the people who are playing the game, people who are commentating on the game, the people who are producing the game are all involved, are all pushing it, are all in some cases actively fixing the results to make profits. It just seems like it's almost like we hit the Wild West. There's too much money sloshing around. There's no way that we can get a hold of it in time. And everyone's just making too much money in order to push back. And so this whole thing is just kind of we're getting the accelerationism. The decisions are just kind of making themselves, because even people who know that ultimately this is wrong or stupid or a long time losing game, they can't turn it away now because it's just too profitable.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the media angle, because as you've said, if this were stocks, it would be market manipulation. The guy on the TV says, buy this, put your money on this, while he is sponsored by the guy on the other end of that.
Only Jim Cramer's allowed to get away with that. Come on.
Well, I mean, you look at the performance of the reverse Cramer ETF fund and you start to wonder, what is he being paid to do?
It's very true.
For instance, right? Do you think if you go to the owner of the casino, if you go to the guy who's running the roulette table and ask him where to put your money, you think he's going to give you an honest answer? His whole success depends on you not making the right decision. And
Right.
so the idea that this isn't corrupting, sports broadcasting, or also the kind of social media influencers, for instance, many athletes who are currently competing in these sports leagues, or, nonetheless, like popular commentators or figures or whatever, giving you what they think you should bet on. Like, this is absurd. Like, again, I know that, imagine if the circumstances were different is kind of the classic conservative refrain. But if you were doing this with the stock market, you would be in jail for the rest of your life. But because it's something different, even though it functions basically the same way, that's completely fine. And again, I don't want to come across as some kind of pearl clutching, social conservative, just upset that people are doing, nasty things, that people have vices. But there's a world of difference between a sensible understanding of, gambling and this unrestricted access to everyone at every stage of life at the press of a button with massive amounts of corruption behind the scenes. It's genuinely, it boggles my mind that this is just something you are supposed to accept. Because if you wrote it out on paper, explaining exactly what the pros and cons of this, no one in their right mind would sign up for it. They'd be like, oh, no, this is a horrible system that's going to make almost everyone's life worse. It's like, yeah, well, it is how it is, basically.
Yeah, no one's talking about like rating your local poker game or making sure that no one can roll dice somewhere in an alley somewhere. It's they're talking about large scale, immediately available, obviously like heroin level of addiction worked into everything, specifically in many cases targeting children. And in some places they'll try to restrict this. They'll try to put it on like one provider. So, for instance, in Florida, Hard Rock is the only one that has sports betting available. But let me tell you a little story about how this works. So, when I was a local reporter early on, I was showing up to all these political events, and there's this table at every event. And every one of these events is this table saying we need to save the Greyhounds because Greyhound racing was all over Florida at the time. And we're an animal rights organization here to save the Greyhounds. And I kept noticing these people at literally every single political event, right, left, conservative, liberal, it didn't matter. The Greyhound people were there. And I thought that was very strange because oftentimes they're in places where this is not their market. This is not the people that they'd normally reach out to. B, these people were too well organized and a little too professional to be in the animal rights
Yeah,
domain.
the lady from your local animal shelter doesn't have a $4,000 Armani suit.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't quite that obvious, but it was definitely a scenario where, okay, usually the people doing this are like kind of your frizzled out wine aunt who like shows up to this kind of thing, right? It's not professional political actors. It's not well turned out, bright, young activists. These who they're not dressed like Antifa. They don't smell like patchouli. Like these are obviously people who could be a professional in other areas. And so I started, I actually did a bit of reporting, shockingly enough, and I started digging into it. Come to discover that the entire thing was being funded by the Seminole Hard Rock casino empire in Florida, because obviously their only competition were the parimutuel facilities where you could race greyhounds. Is the only other place where you could play table games in Florida that wasn't owned by the Seminole Hard Rock Casino franchise, which has the only exclusive rights outside of the parimutuel facilities to do gambling. And so the whole reason that they were funding this animal rights campaign is they didn't give a crap about animal rights. And the whole reason they were doing it is if you could get people to shut down these basically casinos on the fact that they were dog tracks, and that's what allowed them this exception, then that means that the Hard Rock Casino would be the only one. It would be the monopoly inside the entire state. And it worked. They actually passed a state amendment to the Constitution to ban that evil greyhound racing because we won and we saved the poor animals. Every one of them was euthanized, by the way. After that got done, you basically made it impossible for anyone but the casino to run. So that's just, these things are everywhere. There's so much money involved. They're often manipulating you behind the scenes to drive that kind of stuff. And so just be aware that even in these scenarios where they're like, oh, well, at least we're going to make it like this one source so it can be well regulated. It's like, no, this is a state manufactured monopoly specifically driven by horrible interests, making sure that they're the only ones. They have the exclusive right to fleece you. And of course, it's always great that it's the Indian tribe. So take that, white man. You get that at the end of the day. We may have lost most of the country, but we're going to be getting your life savings. So that's what matters.
Can you imagine explaining that circumstance to Thomas Jefferson?
Right.
Like, yeah, so we did ban dog racing in the Constitution. And his major objection is like, one, you guys have Florida now, and you let the Indians do what?
Right.
Like it's just again, like politics is always kind of a slimy game, but in situations like that, it's just so naked. It's like, what can you even say?
Yep. Well, like I said, this is something that I think is a huge issue and I think needs to be taken more seriously. I think conservatives need to be talking about it. I think the right needs to be talking about it. I don't think that we should just allow this to become ubiquitous. I think there is actually quite a good stand on this. And the thing is, like, unlike probably drugs and porn, the thing about gambling is even the people who are addicted to it know it's bad for them in a pretty deep way, right? Like there's people who can lie to themselves about those other vices, but when it comes to gambling, I think pretty much every like degenerate sports gambler knows at some level they're having a problem. Like even the people who are selling gambling are usually have to be like, yeah, you probably shouldn't do too much of this. It's real bad for you, and that's something that I think is you can, I think this is a issue you can win on, is what I'm saying. I think while those other vices are things that people will fight for, and I think actually have a wider percentage of acceptability in society because I think they're more normal human behaviors taken to bad extremes. The gambling one in particular hasn't grabbed a hold of everyone yet. And there's still time for people to say, no, man, actually, this is not a good look and this is not a good life for you. And this will impact your ability to like move forward in life. And you don't want your kids having access to this either. And so I think this is one of those issues where you can push the moral argument effectively, be a real conservative who isn't just worried about liberty in the sense of being able to like bet on whether or not some guy in the fourth quarter will hit a 3-pointer after someone else rebounded something. Like if you can sell that vision to people as a good moral choice, and I think still win on this issue. At least maybe I'm delusional, but that is my hope. And I think this is a stance that ultimately conservatives should take. So before we move on to the questions of the people there, Mr. Burden, where can they find your fantastic content?
Yeah, sure. So my primary output is the Jay Burden Show. If I do say so myself, I'm sort of prolific. I put out 5 interviews a week from many people you will know. I had Auron on not too long ago, maybe 6-7 weeks ago. But other favorites, actually pretty much everyone I've mentioned on this show, Roberto Rios and the Good Old Boys, been on my show a number of times. So the Jay Burden Show, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yes, you will not be gambling with your time there. Sorry. Okay, moving on. Everyone forget I did that. All right. So Machiavelli says, I think they are rigging the NFL in real time currently. Well, I mean, we literally know that's true, right? So that's not even speculation. Is it as wide scale as perhaps you might be insinuating? We don't know, but we do know that the micro manipulation is absolutely happening and driving in other sports. So the idea that there's just none of that happening in the NFL seems insane. So I think you're probably right that that's going to be prevalent there as well.
I'll put it this way: as someone who grew up in the era of like the Ray Rice Ravens, the idea that our sports professionals are just too moral to stoop
Right.
to to fixing a game when the number of NFL players who get a serious felony or kill someone is fairly significant. Like to me, it's like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, what do you think is going to happen?
I can't believe that these felons who are fighting dogs would absolutely never bet on the game that they're playing in. And it is funny. If there's going to be one sports betting market, and I disavow, but if there's going to be one, let it be where I can bet on what crime different sports stars are going to actually like. Okay, I know that quarterback, he's definitely going to get domestic violence before the end of the season, right? What are
You're
the
just
chances?
sitting there like Tom Cruise in Minority Report, like
Right.
murder, drug possession.
Except I'm Steve Saylor, right? Like I'm using I'm using inside Saylor graphs to
3 shot,
apply
no
different
killed.
demographics. Yeah. It's like tight end probably not going to get a weapons charge, Definitely, however, wide receiver, absolutely catching a weapons charge. So
The kicker's cheating on his taxes.
right. Yeah. It's safe to bet he probably doesn't have the heroin habit. Let's see here. We've got Infernal Morance. Sorry if I got that wrong. Sports betting is gamer genocide. We must protect the future of gamers. Everyone recognizes that ultimately gamers are the most oppressed minority in the United States today. So the gamers should, of course, rise up against this horrible threat. The Sanity Revolt says, "Dumb prop bets. What do you mean? Anyway, I took the under amount of times Big Coach Sig smiles at the B1G Championship this week." And I mean, it sounds like a joke, but we really are at that level of complexity of these bets. Like, and again, like the Kalshi stuff literally is you can just bet on anything. It doesn't matter what it is. How many people are going to die to drones that day in the Ukraine war, right? How long will the government shutdown last? What will be the total outcome of the next, I don't know, like probably school shooting at some point will all be on there. It's all horribly degenerate and it just shouldn't exist. Brent Swingle says, one of my favorite friends was traveling in Asia extensively and was amazed at the casinos in South Korea that ban Koreans. Well, yeah, I'm not super familiar with all of the betting laws there, but even when it comes to like for instance, Japan, I think they have or maybe it is South Korea too. They have the whole pachinko parlor culture, right? Because direct betting is banned, so you have to like buy basically like Chuck E. Cheese tickets and trade them in, and then it's not betting, right? Like you win like these glass balls, and then you like trade them in for items in the Chuck E. Cheese store, and that way it's not betting. I'm not familiar with all of the different laws, but I do know that there are these insane loopholes, and yeah, it would make sense that ultimately a country that cared about the people would probably allow stupid foreigners to come in and light their money on fire, but would ban their own citizens from engaging in that behavior.
Well, look, like I'm no great fan of the Chinese government, but they basically invaded a small portion of Myanmar to go after illegal betting and in typically Chinese fashion executed like half a dozen members of the family that owned the casino. Again, not a fan of the Chinese, but they seem to take that problem seriously, even
Yeah,
in another country.
I'm going to officially move that into the based category.
Yeah.
I'm not here to push the Chinese Communist Party, but yeah, right there, I'll say that one is probably the right move. Let's see, we got oh yes, I cannot pronounce your name at all. But he says conservatives need to stop worshiping systems, institutions, and abstract concepts such as capitalism. We should be far more for ordered liberty, not libertinism. Man was not made to serve the GDP. Yeah, again, absolutely true. And this is something that I've been arguing for a long time. This argument has kind of reemerged. Tucker Carlson has made it several times, but this got really fired up again when Ben Shapiro was talking about how everybody needed to move every year and abandon their family and their community because capitalism said so. Look, the point of capitalism, and again, we're not socialists here. We're overall fans of capitalism. The point of capitalism is it helps your people more than other economic systems. I don't care about capitalism as an economic system. I don't care. What I care about is what results does it produce? Does it produce more happiness, more flourishing, more virtue in my society than other systems? And within certain bounds, I think the answer to that is yes. But yes, when you create this system, this like overarching ideology of no, capitalism is a goal, it's a moral good, instead of a system that could achieve moral goods, this is where we run into the huge problem. We've got Joe McDermott who says, are you telling me that Sodom and Gomorrah couldn't have been fixed by legalizing their activities? Nope. Funny enough, God had some other solutions at hand.
I mean, I don't know. I think this time, if we just destigmatize Sodom and Gomorrah type activities, it might work. It hasn't worked for anyone else, but it could work for us.
Well, that is how you get Caesar, so one way or another. Let's see here. No, I'm not. Grim from Red Hood says entire system based upon turbo usury. What a world. And yeah, this is of course something we didn't really get into the aspects of, but lending for this stuff has become very prominent, right? There's lots of ways you can finance and leverage yourself in these scenarios. So it's not even just people losing whatever money they should have been investing into their future, but it's also a scenario where many people are funding their addictions through easy credit, easy money. Restoring Classic says, what's the over under that Kalshi ends society? I see what you did there. Sean Weiland says financial nihilism remains undefeated. Yep, as Burden pointed out, that is definitely an aspect of it here. Life of Brian says my case for prediction markets: if Republicans were allowed to voters against, sorry, trying to turn this into a readable sentence. If Republicans were allowed to voters against themselves, we will be at 0 seats by 20. So I guess what he's trying to say is you could predict that Republicans will vote against their own interests, perhaps. And then I suppose.
Oh, I'm guessing. Wait, I guess if you could get people to vote on elections, they would bet against themselves by making money make money. I guess I don't know.
To rig the elections. Okay, sorry if we're not understanding your question correctly there, sir, but thank you. And then again from Red Hood says the existence of gotcha games actively taking 100 plus just for you to get one character or item is insane. Humanism, I'm sure there's a Japanese way to pronounce that, is one of the worst offenders. I'm not familiar with this type of game. Do you know the terminology for a gotcha game?
Yeah, so gotcha games they're pretty similar to like digital card games, kind of like a digitized version of like MTG or something like that, where there is a game to be played, but different characters are objectively better or worse than others, and you have to draw those characters from loot boxes, basically. Like the game itself is gate kept behind that. Got really big in Asia. That's why a bunch of them are named weird names, but they've gotten really big here. And somehow combining anime and degenerate gambling has made sort of this like super concentrated nuclear waste of degeneracy. And it just nuked from orbit as far as I'm concerned. It is completely.
So is it kind of like pay to play? Like you need to achieve this certain level of like.
It's like, yes, it is, but it's also like your team or basically it's like if you could make a random spin at a like roulette wheel to play Pokemon. That's kind of how I'd describe it.
Okay.
Like your Pokemon would be determined by the pack.
Gotcha.
You can buy them directly or buy spins. Again, I don't really know a lot about this. It's just kind of through osmosis, but a lot of them combine like suspiciously underage anime figures where you're just like, why do we have this? Like, we just put you in jail.
As one of my critical Zoomer correspondents, I need you to, educate me on on all the things that my old man brain cannot comprehend. I'm going to go back and listen to some Led Zeppelin. By the way, did you see, like, this is completely off topic, but I just have to make the joke because it was so funny. The new Chronicles of Narnia that's going to come out on Netflix, which is going to be a unmitigated like disaster. Like it doesn't exist. I'm not even going to react to any of it when it comes out because I know it's going to be so bad. But they were saying something like this one will have contemporary music like Pink Floyd and the Doors. Like contemporary to who? My grandparents? My great grandparents? Like, what are we doing here? Like, just insane.
There's nothing more stuck culture than taking a Christian series for children from the 1950s, stripping out the soul of it, turning it into a Lord of the Rings knockoff, and then putting in nostalgic music for grandparents in it.
Yes.
It's just like your point about, wearing your religion as a skin suit, quite literally happening in real time.
Yeah, absolutely the case. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for coming by and watching. It's fantastic to speak with you. Always fantastic to speak with Mr. Burden. Of course, make sure to immediately go and follow him on all the social medias if you have not done that yet. If it's your first time on this channel, you need to subscribe on YouTube, click the bell and notifications so we know when we're going live. If you want to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you do, leave a rating or review. It really helps with the algorithm magic. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.